The podcast you're about to listen to may contain random lines from musical theater, terrible attempts at regional accents, and a sincere discussion about mental health. You have been warned. Are you ready to start singing with your feet? Formidable! Allez, c'est parti! Non, nous ne sommes pas fous, nous ne sommes pas ivres, nous sommes juste dans la joie. Une joie profonde, nos cœurs elle inonde. Cette joie, elle vient du ciel, non, nous ne sommes pas fous.
Welcome back to Sing With Your Feet. My name is Lily Fields, and I'm going to be your fairy godmother for the next half hour or so. Thank you for your indulgence last week. I hope you enjoyed the rebroadcast, a little trip down memory lane, if you will. The purpose of this week's podcast is to give you some tools to start thinking about happiness. And happiness, for us, is going to be that pursuit of something which, according to Aristotle, is the very path to happiness. That is, virtue. Or if you prefer the more bland, less hypocrisy-laden term, values. I'm loath to use that term of values because it has become a punching bag issue in our culture today. I'm not talking about political values. I am not talking about talking points of value. I am talking about values which make up who we are at our core, values which are what we want to be remembered for after we're dead. I'm not talking about soapbox kind of ideas. I'm talking about who we want to be, the very people that we want to be remembered for being, and how to become those people. Pursuing virtue is not the same thing as being virtuous. Let's be clear on that right away. Every single day, we have choices to make that can get us towards our ideal of a happy life. Do we curse that driver out who cuts us off on the freeway, or do we let it go? Do we fritter away an hour on TikTok watching makeup tutorials, or do we finish putting away the laundry that has been piling up for a week? Sometimes we make the right choices, and sometimes we don't. I do not always make the right choices. I am renowned for not making the right choices, but I desperately want to get better at making them. And in that way, while I am not virtuous, I am pursuing virtue. The will to make better decisions kind of hovers over my life even when I'm incapable of choosing the right thing for whatever reason. And I can tell you that when I do make the right decision and can articulate what I have chosen to do in terms of virtue, like that list of 101 virtues that we've been looking at for the last 3 weeks, well, there is a genuine sense of accomplishment that accompanies it. It may be a small victory, but even something as insignificant as putting down TikTok and putting away socks, I can say, wow, look at Lily Fields being industrious. That's a compliment that I can pay to myself, which feels right and recognizes the tiniest little bit of progress towards happiness. Or when I decide to use brown paper shopping bags to wrap a package instead of dragging my whole entourage to the store to buy wrapping paper, I can tell myself, hey, look at that, Lily Fields being resourceful and creative. There is accomplishment in that, and satisfaction in that. And hey, that's me living out my ideal life right there. Framing our decisions in terms of virtue is an incredible way to feed our self-esteem. Self-esteem, you may have noticed, is one of our 101 virtues. Self-esteem, which we have talked about tangentially over the last year of the podcast, is our ability to love and value ourselves for who we are. And, as I have said a million times and will probably say a million more, I do not see how we can ever figure out how to love others as we love ourselves if we don't know how to love ourselves first. So yes, self-esteem is a virtue. It's one of those psychological virtues we talked about, which, if it is very low, can push us to express humility in toxic ways. Nah, Littlefields. It says right here on my sheet that I printed from your blog that humility is a virtue. Low self-esteem is not synonymous with humility. As a matter of fact, if there is any relationship at all between the two, I would say that low self-esteem and false humility have a greater correlation. An expression of false humility might be, for example, a reluctance to volunteer for an activity out of fear of not being, quote unquote, good enough, or maybe even being ridiculous, even if we are objectively good enough, or that tendency to want to be invited to do something because we want others to recognize our talents rather than to volunteer ourselves. If we refuse to love ourselves as we are, with the treasures that we have been given, whether it is our time, our talent, or our treasure, we will struggle with this feeling of inadequacy for our entire lives. Without the ability to value who we are and to lucidly determine what our talents are, that is what will hold us back from happiness. We will be what holds us back from happiness and from living our lives in a fulfilled way. We will have regrets at the end of our lives. There is another option, of course. We can undertake to discover the meaning of our life, the talents, the treasures that we've been given, and pursue happiness in the form of virtue. We can learn to fully live our lives. Let me remind you of something, because I haven't said it in a long time. You are on this planet for a reason. It may be difficult for you to accept this reality, but it doesn't make it any less true. You are special. You are precious. You're here for a reason. You make this planet a better place simply because you're here. So back to what we were saying earlier, taking that list of 101 virtues to heart, studying it, and breaking down the way we graded ourselves, taking particular note of the virtues that we want to improve in, and that we know that we struggle in. Just that, can actually help us be happier. By becoming intimately familiar with the values, or the values that we want to have define our lives, we know what we want our lives to look like, and can therefore start making decisions to help us get there. This goes hand in hand with our ideal life exercise and pursuing and defining our ideal lives. Remember what we said. One of the greatest regrets of the dying is that they didn't live according to their values, which we are using synonymously with virtue. One of the greatest regrets of the dying is that they didn't live according to their values and the virtues. But here's the thing. If we don't know what our values are, if we don't know what the virtues are that we want our life to look like, we can get to the end of our lives having made choices that are expeditious in the short term, sure, but detrimental to our happiness in the long term. Again, I will say this for the millionth time, I am by no means a paragon of virtue. But as this pursuit of virtue has become something of a theme in my life and has started to truly define who I want to be, I've become very sensitive to the moments in my life when I'm at a crossroads and I need to make a choice based on who I want to be remembered as having been. Oh my goodness, just thinking about the sentence I just pronounced, it sounds ridiculous, so I think we need to take an example. One thing that is very important to me in my life and always has been is punctuality. Another thing that's very important to me is being compassionate to my children. Sometimes multiple times a week, the collision of these two virtues brings me to a crossroads. There are days when my children try my patience so much that I want to pull my hair out. I would say that 7 times out of 10, those times don't trigger a crossroads feeling. I wish I could identify the moment when something goes from being a struggle about getting my children to put their shoes on and get out the door in the morning that turns into something far deeper. But maybe 3 times out of 10, I will see that this rushing for punctuality, which, lest we forget, is a virtue, and incidentally, for my family, usually means being about 5 minutes early for everything. This pressure that I'm putting on them to be on time is turning me into a tyrant and someone that I cannot stand. It could be because suddenly the little one becomes needy and wants me to put his shoes on for him. I mean, he's 6 years old. Or because the older one has picked a fight with his father and is in a foul mood. Whatever the situation, I will get to a point where I see that if I decide to be compassionate and loving and give my little one that tiny bit of one-on-one connection that he needs by putting his shoes on for him, we might end up being late. And then I have to make a choice. Do I choose compassion or punctuality? And suddenly, this becomes a situation about virtue, and it is no longer a power struggle between me and my kid. And here, at this point, only 3 times out of 10 will a little switch flip on in my head, and I will ask myself the question, if this was my last day on earth, how would I want to be remembered? Would I want to be remembered by people that I barely even knew as being that lady who's always 5 minutes early for everything? Or would I want to be remembered by my kids as a loving, compassionate, patient mother who strives to have moments of connection with her youngest child who, for whatever reason, needed a little bit of extra love this morning? The truth is that even after I have asked that little question in my mind, I don't always make the right choice. Sometimes, because I really am too stubborn or too tyrannical to budge, I will announce that my kid will go to school without his shoes on and that he will have to explain it to his teacher, or that I will just leave without them. But sometimes, even more rarely than that 3 times out of 10, I will make a different choice. And I will decide that if this was it, this was the last thing my kid would ever remember about me, I would want to do right by him. I would rather be loving than punctual. And once I've made that decision, I can put up with the whining and the crying and maybe even not being perfectly on time. I can change my tone of voice, get down on the floor with my perfectly capable 6-year-old, pop on his shoes, wipe away his tears, and get on the road. So you see, it's not glamorous. It's not earth-shattering. When I've made the right choice, I feel good. I feel, dare I say it, I even feel happy. Again, I do not always make the right choice. There are times when I just can't. And in those moments, I know for a fact that I am the architect of my own unhappiness because I had a choice to embody the virtue that I want to be remembered for, and I opted for expeditiousness. Virtue is aspirational. I know not a single person who wakes up in the morning saying that they want to be dishonest, impatient, and stingy. But then, on the other hand, I don't know anyone who wakes up and says, today I'm going to be honest, patient, and generous. I don't know that person either. But maybe we should try to articulate that wish. Our thoughts and our words have so much power over our actions. The risk is, of course, that in the 2 hours after we have said, I want to be honest, patient, and generous today, that we will already have lost our patience with our children, ignored the guy asking for money outside of the parking garage, and lied to our boss about why we were late to work. We say one thing, and we do its opposite. The juxtaposition of these two realities, our desire to be virtuous, which is a reality, and our behavior, which is also a reality. This juxtaposition is what births in us the feeling, nay, the firm conviction of our own hypocrisy. I am not the only one who experiences this, and I know it, so I'm not asking you to raise your hand, but I know that I am not the only one this happens to. And it reminds me of a Bible verse that I come back to again and again because it so well describes how I feel about myself and my life. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to read you the Bible verse. I'm going to sing it for you. I wrote a song 14 years ago that takes the words of this Bible verse and puts it into music. The song is called Unspiritual. You'll see why. Forgive the quality. It's not fantastic. But just be indulgent with me for a second.
We know the law is spiritual, but I am unspiritual. I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do. But what I hate, I do. And if I do what I don't want to do, I
So you get it. I am unspiritual. I am unvirtuous. And whether we call it unspiritual or unvirtuous, the reality is, no matter our best intentions, we will end up doing the wrong thing sometimes. It is easier to curse out the person who cuts us off on the freeway than to have self-control, which is a virtue, to be cool and to just let it go. Whatever it is, this Bible verse calls it evil, and it calls it sin, but let's just call it human nature. Human nature that pushes us to do the things that we know aren't right. The actions, reactions, thoughts that we are embarrassed by, that we dread and we want to change about ourselves. This impulse to do the wrong thing is one that we have to exert effort to redirect, and even then, we often end up screwing up. So do you know what I did this morning instead of doing my ideal life exercise, which I do for 5 minutes, usually almost every single morning, except for today? I watched the green light videos of the Greatest Showman cast, even though I have watched those and cried through them a dozen times already. I cannot do the right thing. There's nothing wrong with watching those videos. Let's make that incredibly clear. Those videos are amazing. But when there is something that I could be doing to get me closer to my ideal life, because the habit of it starts my day off better and makes me feel better about where I'm going and about my place in the universe, shouldn't I be doing that instead rather than living joy vicariously through the cast of The Greatest Showman? Living virtuously is about setting priorities and learning to make choices that will get us closer to who we dream of becoming. When we were kids and we took math class, there were right answers and wrong answers. The wrong answers were circled in red, and it made me so mad to see my errors circled in red so that everyone could see that I had screwed up. And that's what the pursuit of virtue can feel a whole heck of a lot like. Articulating our desire to be virtuous can feel a lot like circling our lack of virtue in any given situation, like circling that in red ink. And this is where we owe it to ourselves to be authentic. We need to recognize that we are on a path towards happiness. We are working towards something bigger and more important than each individual failure. I don't do this very often, but here I am, twice in one episode, getting all hoity-toity and spiritual. But I want to share another Bible verse that I like to remind myself of when I start to doubt that this pursuit is worth anything other than making myself keenly aware of how unworthy, unvirtuous, and unspiritual I am. It's found in the book of Galatians, and it starts off with a nice little list of biblical virtues, or as it's called here, the fruit of the Spirit. So here it is. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things, there is no law. Did you catch that? There is no law against joy, kindness, faithfulness, and self-control. Pursuing virtue is not against the law. There are a ton of things that we could be pursuing. Pursuing those 101 virtues is never going to get us into trouble. And it has the potential of bringing us a lot of joy.
Elle me fait bondir et vibrer, crier. Elle me donne envie de chanter, danser. Elle pousse à agir, donner, partager. Et tout simplement de sourire, aimer.
This half hour has gone way faster than I expected it to, so I just want to bring up one point before I sign off. Virtue and color, we've already said this before, studying them, they're kind of parallel. There are different facets of color, things like hue, saturation, the presence of colors, the absence of colors, how we feel about a color. Is it warm or is it cold? Things like that are actually ways that we can look at virtue too. There are different facets of virtue, and we will be looking at those in the next couple of weeks. But one word, one concept that accompanies virtue at every turn is the idea of wisdom. Wisdom is like, well, it's like the presence of all the virtues at the same time. Just like white is the presence of all colors. I want us to remember that this week. wisdom, because I know for a fact that talking about wisdom sounds like such a fuddy-duddy, uncool thing. But wisdom is what is going to help us make the right choices more often. We had an entire episode about making wise decisions, which I know was not your favorite episode, but it is something that is so critical to me personally in my ideal life. It's so critical that it is one of my ideal life themes, making wise decisions. Wisdom is what is going to help us make the right choices about compassion or punctuality. When we have a choice, we need wisdom to help us make that choice. Pursuing virtue is going to help us get better every single day at making the right choices. And I know for a fact that when we call on wisdom and we look at the situations of our lives through that prism of wisdom, it makes us happier. It makes us more humble because we recognize how incapable we are of making right choices by ourselves. Here comes the part of the podcast in which I catch you up on my efforts to live out the golden rule. Remember, the golden rule is to love others as we love ourselves. And as we said earlier in the podcast, I believe that it is very difficult to love others as we love ourselves if we don't first love ourselves. I'm trying as much as I can this year to love others as I love myself, loving myself along the way. So, this year, I have been doing a project in the school that my kids go to. I am doing it with all 7 classes at that school. That's about 180 kids. It's a project where at the beginning of the school year, I introduced them to the idea of how clothes are made and where they come from, the different techniques that are used to make fabrics. And then I took with me a whole bunch of wool and I showed them how to do things like spin wool and how to weave. And we even tried our hand at sewing and knitting. And then this last time I went, it was the time when I was going to teach them how to felt wool. And then we were going to felt wool and turn it into a little rose brooch that we were going to give to their mothers for Mother's Day, which is coming up in a month. So I went there, 2 weeks ago, and spent every day working on this little felting project with 180 kids. Now, I have spent quite a bit of time in the school with these kids doing this project throughout the year. So I've gotten to know them, they've gotten to know me, and one of these kids happens to be a little girl. She is in my eldest's class, and she's just very sweet. She's very nice. She speaks English really well, which makes it fun for us to chit-chat together. And she's someone who every single time that I have seen her this year, she comes up and she gives me a big hug, which, of course, I love. And I learned that she was going to be moving away. I learned this last week when I went to take the felted roses, which were finally dried, and I had sewn the little brooch pins on the back, and I went to show them to the class. I wanted to see that their work before the vacation started. And I learned that day that this girl was going to be moving. So I wanted to make sure that I gave her the flower that was going to be for her mother for Mother's Day. And then I got to thinking about it, and I wanted to give her just a little something made out of wool to remember us by. So I had given her one of these little cardboard hearts I had made, where I had punched holes in it and then sewn around it the wool, and it's actually really pretty. And it was just a little decoration that she could hang up in her room wherever she moved to. So I gave that to her, and the next day, or maybe even later that day, she said, "Oh, hey, Joel's mom, thank you so much for the heart." And I said, "You bet. I just wanted you to know you're really special to us." So I went to drop off my boys at school this morning, and I realized that this morning was going to be her last day at school. And I thought, well, boy, it would have been really nice to just say goodbye to her, but then, who am I in her life? I'm just some lady. Well, I did not have the time to even finish that thought that I heard her go, "Hey, Joel's mom." And I saw her and I was like, what do you say to someone when it's going to be the last time that you ever see them? So we started talking and I said, "Wow, how exciting. Are your boxes all done? Are you excited to move?" And then I realized, this is it. This is the last time I'm going to have anything to say to her. And so I looked at her and I said, "Hey, be great. No, don't be great. Be extraordinary." So I realized that if I were to love others the way that I want to be loved, I want to be reminded to be great, and to be extraordinary. So there you go. That's how I lived out the golden rule today. And I want to remind you to be great and be extraordinary. It takes so little to be extraordinary. And you can fail, you can mess up, but you can always start over again. Whew. Well, thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. I want to give a great big thank you to 7 Productions here in Mulhouse, France for the use of the song La Joie as the intro and outro to the program. Also to Claude Ekwe, who wrote it, and to Matt Kugler, whose new album Aventura is out on all the digital music platforms, who sang it. This is your fairy godmother signing off. Just remember, it is never too late to start singing with your feet.